All right, here we go. Surrounded by the kids. We got Cohen, we have Ashlyn and Liam. We've got Ashlyn and we have Brennan. All right, so this is what it is. It's Cockroaches from Joe Nesbø. It's the second book in the Harry Horla series. It's all for you, Colleen. Part 1. Chapter 1. Tuesday, January 7th. The traffic lights changed to green, and the roar from the lorries, cars, motorbikes, and tuk-tuks rose higher and higher until Dim could see the glass in Robinson's department store vibrating. Then the queues started moving, and the shop window displaying the long red silk dress was lost behind them in the darkness. She took a taxi, not a packed bus or a tuk-tuk riddled with rust, but a taxi with air conditioning and a driver who kept his mouth shut. She leaned back against the headrest and tried to enjoy the ride. No problem. A moped shot past, and a girl on the pillion, clinging to a red t-shirt with a visor helmet, gave them a vacant look. Hold on tight, Dim thought. On Rama 4 Road, the driver pulled in behind a lorry, spewing exhaust fumes so thick and black she couldn't see the number plate. After passing through the air conditioning system, the exhaust was chilled and almost odorless. Almost. She wafted her hand discreetly to show her reaction, and the driver glanced in his mirror and moved into the outside lane. No problem. This was how her life had always been. On the farm where she had grown up, she had been one of 6 girls. 6 too many, according to her father. She had been 7 years old when they stood coughing in the yellow dust and waving as the cart carrying her eldest sister trundled down the country road alongside the brown canal water. Her sister had been given clean clothes, a train ticket to Bangkok, and an address in Patpong written on the back of a business card, and she cried like a waterfall. Even though Dim had waved so hard it felt as if her hand would fall off. Her mother had patted her on the head and said it wasn't easy, but it wasn't that bad either. At least her sister wouldn't have to wander from farm to farm as a kwai, as her mother had done before she got married. Besides, Ms. Wong had promised she would take good care of her. Her father had nodded, spat Betelgeuse from between black teeth, and added that the farangs in the bars would pay well for fresh girls. Dim hadn't understood what her mother meant by kwai, but she wasn't going to ask. She knew, of course, that a kwai was a bull. Like most people on the farms around them, they couldn't afford a bull, so they hired one of the ones that circulated the district when the rice paddy had to be plowed. It was only later she found out that the girl who accompanied the bull was also called a kwai, as her services formed part of the deal. That was the tradition. She hoped she would meet a farmer who would have her before she got too old. When Dim was 15, her father had called her name as he waded across the paddy field with the sun behind him and his hat in hand. She hadn't answered at once. She had straightened up and looked hard at the green ridges around the small farm, closed her eyes, and listened to the sound of the trumpeter bird in the leaves and inhaled the smell of eucalyptus and rubber trees. She had realized it was her turn. For the first year, they had lived 4 girls to... For the first year, they had lived 4 girls to a room and shared everything: bed, food, and clothes. The last of these was especially important, for without nice clothes, you wouldn't get the best customers. She had taught herself to dance, taught herself to smile, taught herself to see which men only wanted to buy drinks, and which wanted to buy sex. Her father had already agreed with Miss Wang that the money was to be sent home, so she didn't see much of it during the first few years. But Ms. Wang was content, and as time went by, she kept more back for Dim. Ms. Wang had reason to be content. Dim worked hard, and the customers bought drinks. Ms. Wang should be pleased she was still there, because a couple of times it had been a close-run thing. A Japanese man had wanted to marry Dim, but withdrew his offer when she demanded money for the plane ticket. An American had taken her along to Phuket, postponed his journey home, and bought her a diamond ring. She had pawned it the day after he left. Some paid badly and told her to get lost if she complained. Others reported her to Ms. Wang if she didn't comply with everything they wanted her to do. They didn't understand that once they had bought her time from the bar, Miss Wang had her money and Dim was her own boss. Her own boss. She thought about the red dress in the shop window. Her mother had been right. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't that bad either. And she had managed to retain her innocent smile and happy laughter. They liked that. Perhaps that was why she had been offered the job Wang Li had advertised in Tai Rath under the heading of GRO, or Guest Relation Officer. Wang Li was a small, dark-skinned Chinese man who ran a motel some way out on Sukhumvit Road, and the customers were mainly foreigners with special requests, but not so special that she couldn't meet them. To tell the truth, she liked what she did better than dancing for hours in the bar. Besides, Wang Li paid well. The sole disadvantage was that it took such a long time to get there from her apartment in Bang Lam Phu. The damn traffic! It had come to a standstill again, and she told the driver she would get out, even though it meant crossing 6 lanes of cars to reach the motel on the far side of the road. The air wrapped itself around her like a hot, wet towel as she left the taxi. She searched for a gap, holding her hand in front of her mouth, aware that it made no difference, and there was no other air to breathe in Bangkok, but at least she spared the smell. She slipped between vehicles, had to sidestep a pickup with a flatbed full of boys whistling, and she almost had her heels straps taken off by a kamikaze Toyota. Then she was across. Wang Li looked up as she entered the deserted reception area. "Quiet evening," she said. He nodded his displeasure. There had been a few of them over the last year. "Have you eaten?" "Yes," she lied. He meant well, but she was not in the mood for the watery noodles he boiled up in the back room. "You'll have to wait," he said. "The Farang wanted to have a sleep first. He'll ring when he's ready." She groaned. "You know I have to be back at the bar before midnight, Lee." He looked at his watch. "Give him an hour." She shrugged and sat down. If it had been a year ago, he would probably have thrown her out for speaking like that. But now, he needed all the income he could get. Of course, she could go, but then the long journey would have been wasted. Also, she owed Lee a favor. She had worked for worse pimps. After stubbing out the third cigarette, she rinsed her mouth with Lee's bitter Chinese tea and rose for a final check of her makeup in the mirror over the counter. "I'll go and wake him," she said. Have you got the skates?" She lifted her bag. Her heels crunched on the gravel of the empty drive between the low motel rooms. Room 120 was right in the back. She couldn't see a car outside, but there was a light in the window. So perhaps he had woken up. A little breeze lifted her short skirt, but failed to cool her. She longed for a monsoon, for rain. Just as after a few weeks of floating, muddy streets and mildew on her washing, she would long for the dry, windless months. She tapped the door lightly with her knuckles and put on her bashful smile with the question, "What's your name?" already on her lips. No one answered. She tapped again and looked at her watch. She could probably haggle a few hundred baht off the price of the dress, even if it was Robinson's. She turned the door handle and discovered to her surprise the door was unlocked. He was lying prone on the bed, and her first impression was that he was asleep. Then she saw the glint of the knife's blue glass handle, sticking out of the loud yellow jacket. It's hard to say which of all the thoughts racing through her brain appeared first, but one of them was definitely that the trip to Bang Lum Phu had been wasted anyway. Then she finally gained control of her vocal cords. The scream, however, was drowned out by the resounding blast on a lorry's horn as it avoided an inattentive tuk-tuk on Sukhumvit Road. Chapter 2. Wednesday, January 8th. National Theater. A sleepy, nasally voice announced over the speakers before the tram doors flipped open and Dagfinn Torhus stepped out into the cold, damp darkness. The air stung his freshly shaved cheeks, and in the glow from Oslo's frugal neon lighting, he could see frozen breath streaming from his mouth. It was early January, and he knew it would be better later in the winter when the fjord was frozen over and the air became drier. He started to walk up Dremmensvine Road. Toward the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A couple of solitary taxis passed him. Otherwise, the streets were as good as deserted. The Gansidig clock shone red against the black winter sky above the building opposite, informing him it was only 6. Outside the door, he took out his entrance card. Post Director, it said above a photo of a 10 years younger Dagfinn Torhus, staring into the camera, chin jutting, gaze determined, from behind steel-rimmed glasses. He swiped the card, tapped in the code, and pushed open the heavy glass doors in Victoria Terrace. Not all doors had opened as easily since he came here as a 25-year-old, almost 30 years ago. At the diplomatic school, the Foreign Office Institute for Aspiring Officials, he had not exactly melted into his surroundings. With his broad Osterdal accent and rural ways, as one of the posh Barum boys in his year's intake had pointed out. The other aspirants had been students of politics, economics, and law, with parents who were academics, politicians, or themselves members of the FO aristocracy to which they were seeking admission. He was a farmer's son with qualifications from the agricultural high school in Oss. Not that it bothered him much, but he knew that real friends were important for his career. As Dagfinn was trying to learn the social codes, he compensated by grafting even harder. Whatever the differences, they all shared the fact that they had only vague notions of where they wanted to go in life and the knowledge that only one direction counted: up. Torhus signed and nodded at the security guard. Torhus sighed and nodded at the security guard, who pushed his newspapers and an envelope under the glass window. Any other? The guard shook his head. First to arrive as always, Torhus. The envelope's from the communications. It was delivered last night. Torhus watched the floor numbers flash as the lift raised him higher in the building. He had this idea that every floor represented a certain period in his career, and so it was subject to review every morning. The first floor was the first 2 years on the diplomatic course, the long, non-committal discussions about politics and history, and the French lessons he had hauled himself through by the bootstraps. The second floor was the placement. He had been stationed in Canberra for 2 years, then Mexico City for 3. Wonderful cities, for that matter. No, he couldn't complain. True, he had put London and New York as his first 2 choices, but these were prestigious postings that everyone else had also applied for, so he had made up his mind not to regard them as a defeat. On the third floor, he was back in Norway, without the generous foreign benefits and housing supplements which had allowed him to live a life of insouciance. It's a word I don't know. And plenty. He had met Barrett. She had become pregnant, and when it had been time to apply for a new foreign posting, number 2 was already on the way. Barrett was from the same region as he was and chatted to her mother every day. He had decided to wait a little and opted to work like a Trojan, writing kilometer-long reports on bilateral trade with developing countries. Hold on. It was time to get the firefighters money again. I can't do it. Where was I? All right. He had decided to wait a little and opted to work like a Trojan, writing kilometer-long reports on bilateral trade with developing countries, composing speeches for the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and reaping acknowledgement as he made his way up the building. Nowhere else in the state system is competition as fierce as at the Foreign Office, where the hierarchy is so obvious. Dagfinn Torres had gone to the office, like a soldier, to the front, kept his head down, back covered, and fired whenever he had someone in his sights. A few pats on the shoulder came his way. He knew he had been noticed and had tried to explain to Barrett that he could probably get Paris or London. But for the first time in their hitherto humdrum marriage, she had put her foot down. He had given in. His upwardly mobile trend had vanished almost without a trace, and suddenly, one morning in the bathroom mirror, he saw a director shunted into the sidings, a moderately influential bureaucrat who would never manage to leap to the 5th floor, not with him being 10 years or so from retirement age. Unless he pulled off a sensational coup of course. But while that kind of stunt could lead to promotion, it could just as easily lead to the boot. Nevertheless, he continued as before, trying to keep his nose in front of the others. He was first in the office every morning so that he could read the newspapers and faxes in peace and quiet, and already had his conclusions to hand at morning meetings by the time the others sat rubbing sleep out of their eyes. It was as though striving had entered his bloodstream. He unlocked his office door and hesitated for a moment before switching on the light. That, too, had a history. Unfortunately, it had leaked out, and he knew it had attained legendary status in ministry circles. Many years ago, the then American ambassador in Oslo had rung Torres early one morning and asked what he thought about President Carter's remarks the previous night. Torres had just come in the office door. He hadn't read the newspapers or the faxes and was lost for an answer. Needless to say, that had ruined his day. And it was to get worse. The next morning, the ambassador had rung as he was opening the newspaper and asked how the events of the night would affect the situation in the Middle East. The following morning, the same thing happened. Torres, undermined by doubts and lack of information, had stuttered an incoherent response. He had started to arrive at the office even earlier, but the ambassador appeared to have a sixth sense, for every morning the telephone rang just as he was settling into his chair. It was only then, when he discovered that the ambassador was staying in the small Aker hotel directly opposite the Foreign Office, that he worked out the connection. The ambassador, who everyone knew liked to get up early, had of course noticed that the light in Torres's office came on before the others and wanted to tease the zealous diplomat. Torres had gone out and bought a headlamp, and the next morning he had read all the newspapers and faxes before switching on the office light. He did this for almost 3 weeks before the ambassador gave up. At this moment, however, Dagfinn Torres couldn't give a damn about the fun-loving ambassador. He had opened the envelope from communications, and on the decoded paper copy of the crypto fax stamped "Top Secret" There was a message that caused him to spill coffee over the notes strewn around his desk. The short text left a lot to the imagination, but the essence was basically this: Norway's ambassador in Thailand, Atle Mols, had been found with a knife in his back in a Bangkok brothel. Torus read the facts once more before putting it down. Atle Mols, former Christian Democrat politician, former chairman of the Finance Committee, was now a former everything else as well. It was so incredible that he was forced to glance over at Aker Hotel to see if anyone was standing behind the curtains. Reasonably enough, the sender was the Norwegian embassy in Bangkok. Torus swore. Why did this have to happen now of all times, in Bangkok of all places? Should he inform the Secretary of State Askildsen first? No, he would find out soon enough. Torus looked at his watch and lifted the telephone receiver to call the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Okay, I'm going to call this guy Barney. It's spelled B-J-A-R-N-E. Barney Mueller tapped gently on the door and opened it. The voices in the meeting room fell quiet and the faces turned toward him. This is Barney Mueller, head of crime squad, said the police commissioner, motioning him to take a seat. Mueller, this is Secretary of State Bjorn Askildsen from the Prime Minister's office, and HR Director Dagfinn Doris from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Mueller nodded, pulled out a chair, and tried to maneuver his unbelievably long legs under the large, oval oak table. He thought he had seen Askildsen's sleek young face on TV. The Prime Minister's office? It had to be a serious trouble. Great, you can make it as such short notice. Maybe if I stop moving, I can read properly. Great, you could make it at such short notice, the Secretary of State said, rolling his R's and drumming the table nervously with his fingers. Commissioner, could you give a brief resume of what we've been discussing? Mueller had received a call from the police commissioner 20 minutes before. Without any explanation, she had given him 15 minutes to make his way to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Atle Mols was found dead, probably murdered, in Bangkok, the police commissioner began. Mueller saw Director Torres roll his eyes behind the steel-rimmed glasses, and after he had been given the rest of the story, he understood his reaction. You would definitely have to be a policeman to state that a man who had been found with a knife protruding from one side of his spine, through a lung, and into the heart had probably been murdered. He was found in a hotel room by a woman. In a brothel? The man with the steel... In a brothel? The man with the steel glasses interrupted. By a prostitute. I've had a chat with my colleague in Bangkok, the police commissioner said. A fair-minded man. He's promised to keep a lid on the matter for a while. Mueller's first instinct had been to ask why they should wait before going public with the murder. Immediate press coverage often produced tip-offs for the police, as people's memories were clear and the evidence was still fresh. But something told him this question would be regarded as very naive. Instead, he asked how long they counted on being able to keep a lid on this sort of matter. Long enough for us to establish a palatable version of events, I hope, the Secretary of State said. The present one won't do, you see. The present one? So the real version had been considered and rejected. As a relatively new Politia Avdelvingsjuv, or PAS, I like that one, PAS. Mueller had so far been spared any dealings with politicians, but he knew the higher up the service you went, the harder it was to keep them at arm's length. So PS is a rank. Call him Paz Mueller. I appreciate that the present version is uncomfortable, but what do you mean by it won't do? The police commissioner gave Mueller an admonitory look. Secretary of State looked unimpressed. "We haven't got much time, Mueller, but let me give you a swift course in practical politics. Everything I say now is, of course, strictly confidential." Of course. Askildsen instinctively adjusted the knot of his tie, a movement Mueller recognized from his television interviews. "Well, for the first time in post-war history, we have a center party with a reasonable chance of survival. Not because there is any parliamentary basis for it, but because the Prime Minister happens to be on the way to becoming one of the country's least unpopular politicians." The police commissioner and director from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs smiled. "However, his popularity rests on the same fragile foundation that is a stock in trade for all politicians: trust. The most important thing is not to be likable or charismatic. It is to enjoy trust. Do you know why Gro Harlem Brundtland was such a popular prime minister, Mueller?" Mueller had no idea. "Not because she was a charmer, but because people were confident that she was the person she claimed to be. Trust, that's the key word." The others around the table nodded. This is clearly part of the core curriculum. Now, Ambassador Moulins and our current Prime Minister were closely connected, through friendship as well as their political careers. They studied together, rose up through the party ranks together, battled through the modernization of the youth movement, and even shared a flat when they were both elected to Storting at a very young age. Moulins voluntarily stepped out of the limelight when they were joint heirs apparent to the party. He gave the Prime Minister his full support, and hence we were spared an agonizing party duel. All this obviously means that the Prime Minister owed Moulins a debt of gratitude. Askildsen moistened his lips and looked out the window. "Any other words, Ambassador Moulins didn't have any..." In other words, Ambassador Moulins didn't have any diplomatic training and wouldn't have got to Bangkok if the Prime Minister hadn't pulled strings. Perhaps this sounds like cronyism, but it's an acceptable form of it, introduced and given general currency by the Socialist Party. Rolf Steen didn't have any Foreign Office experience when he was made ambassador in Chile. The eyes refocused on Mueller, a playful glint dancing inside somewhere. "I'm sure I don't need to emphasize how this could damage trust in the Prime Minister if it comes out that a friend and party comrade whom he appointed himself was caught in flagrante in a brothel and murdered into the bargain." The Secretary of State motioned to the police commissioner to continue, but Mueller couldn't restrain himself. "Who hasn't gotten a pal who's been into a brothel?" Askildsen's smile curled at the edges. The Foreign Office director with the steel glasses coughed. "You've been told what you need to know, Mueller. Please leave the judgments to us. What we need is someone to ensure that the investigation of this matter does not take an unfortunate turn. Naturally, we all want the murderer, or murderers, to be apprehended, but the circumstances surrounding the murder should remain under wraps until further notice. For the good of the country. Do you understand?" Mueller looked down at his hands. For the good of the country. Bloody hell. They had never been much good at doing what they were told in his family. His father had never risen through the police ranks. "Experience tells us the truth tends to be hard to conceal, Herr Taurus." "Indeed. I'll take responsibility for this operation on behalf of the Foreign Office. As you appreciate, this is a somewhat delicate matter, which will demand close cooperation with the Thai police. As the embassy is involved, we have some leeway, diplomatic immunity and all that. But we're walking a tightrope here. Therefore, we wish to send someone with honed investigative skills and experience of international police work who can produce results." He stopped and looked at Mueller, who was wondering why he felt an instinctive lack of goodwill toward the diplomat with an aggressive chin. We could put together a team with... No, Mueller. Too conspicuous. Besides, your commissioner thinks that a whole division would hardly be conducive to good relations with the local police. One man. One man? The commissioner has already suggested a name, and we consider it a good suggestion. Now, we'd like to hear your opinion of him. According to conversations the police commissioner has had with his colleague in Sydney, he did remarkable work down there last winter in connection with the Inger Holter murder. The first book. I read the story in the papers, as Skildenson said. Impressive stuff. Surely he has to be our man? Barney Mueller swallowed. So the police commissioner has suggested they should send Harry Hola to Bangkok. He had been summoned to assure them that Hola was the best force the force had to offer, the perfect man for the job. He glanced around the table. Politics, power, and influence. This was a game he couldn't begin to understand, but he realized that in some way or another, it would work out in his favor, that whatever he said now would have consequences for his career. The police commissioner had stuck her neck out by suggesting a name, probably one of the others he had asked to have Hola's qualification endorsed by his immediate superiors. He looked at his boss and tried to interpret her expression. Of course, everything might turn out fine with Hola. And if he advised them not to send him, would that not cast the commissioner in an unfortunate light? He would be asked to suggest an alternative, and then his head would be the one on the block if the officer concerned messed up. Mueller looked at the painting above the police commissioner. Trygve Lie, the UN Secretary General, gazed down at him imperiously. A politician as well. Through the windows, he saw the roofs of the apartment buildings in the low winter light. Akershus fortress, with a weathercock shivering in the icy gusts on top of Continental Hill. Barney Mueller knew he was a competent police officer, but this was a different game, and he didn't know the rules. What would his father have advised him to do? Well, Officer Mueller had never had to deal with politics, but he had known what was important if he was to be taken at all seriously, and had forbidden his son to start police college until he had completed the first part of a law course. He had done as his father said, and after the graduation ceremony his father had kept clearing his throat, overcome with emotion, while slapping his son on the back until he'd had to ask him to stop. A great suggestion, Barney Mueller heard himself say in a loud, clear voice. Good, Torres said. The reason we wanted an opinion so quickly is that, of course, all this is urgent. He'll have to drop everything he's working on. He's leaving tomorrow. Well, perhaps it's just the sort of job Harry needs right now, Mueller hoped. Sorry, we have to deprive you of such an important man, as Skildenson said. Barney Mueller had to stop himself bursting into laughter. Water break. And we're back. Chapter 3. Wednesday, January 8th. They found him at Schroeder's in Waldemar, Thrane's Gate, a venerable old watering hole located at the crossroads where Oslo East meets Oslo West. It was more old than venerable, to be honest. The venerable part was largely down to the authorities' decision to put a preservation order on the smoke-filled brown rooms. But the order did not include the clientele. Old boozers, a hunted and extinction-threatened bunch, eternal students, and jaded charmers long past their sell-by date. The two officers spotted their man sitting under a painting of Aker Church as the draft from the door allowed a brief glimpse through the curtain of smoke. His blond hair was cropped so short the bristles stood up straight, and the 3-day beard on the lean, marked face was a streak of gray, even though he could hardly be older than his mid-30s. He sat alone, straight-backed, wearing his reefer jacket, as if about to leave any minute. As if the beer in front of him on the table was not a source of pleasure but a job that had to be done. "They said we would find you here," said the older of the two, and sat down opposite him. "I'm Waller." "See the guy sitting in the corner?" Hola said without looking up. Waller turned and saw a scrawny old man gazing into his glass of red wine while rocking backward and forward. He seemed to be freezing cold. "They call him the last Mohican." Hola raised his head and beamed. His eyes were like blue and white marbles behind a network of red veins, and they focused on Waller's shirt. "Merchant seaman," he said, his diction meticulous. "Used to be lots of them here a few years back, apparently, but now there are hardly any left. He was torpedoed twice during the war. He thinks he's immortal. Last week, after closing time, I found him sleeping in a snowdrift down in Glückstadt Gata. The streets were empty. It was pitch black and -18. When I'd shaken some life back into him, he just looked at me and told me to go to hell." He laughed. "Listen, Hola, I went over to his table last night and asked if he remembered what had happened. I mean, that I'd saved him from freezing to death. Do you know what he said?" "Mueller wants to see you, Hola." "He said he was immortal. I can put up with being an unwanted merchant seaman in this shit country," he said. "But it's a sorry business when even St. Peter doesn't want anything to do with me." "Did you hear? Even St. Peter. We've got orders to take you to the station." Another beer landed on the table in front of Hola with a thud. Out, not there. Landed on the table with a thud. "Let's settle up now, Rita," he said. 280, she answered without needing to check her slips of paper. "Jesus Christ," mumbled the younger officer. "That's fine, Rita." "Oh, thanks." She was gone. "Best service in town," Harry explained. "Sometimes she can spot you even when you haven't been waving both arms in the air." The skin on Waller's forehead tightened and a blood vessel appeared, like a blue, knobbly worm. "We haven't got the time to sit here and listen to your drunken ramblings, Hola. I suggest you give the last beer a miss." Hola had already put the glass carefully to his lips and started drinking. Waller leaned forward and tried to keep his voice low. "I know about you, Hola, and I don't like you. I think you should have been booted out of the force years ago. Guys like you make people lose respect for the police. But that's not why we're here now. We've come to take you with us. The Pass is a nice man. Perhaps he'll give you another chance." Hola belched and Waller leaned back. "Another chance to do what?" "To show what you can do," the young officer said with a boyish smile. "I'll show you what I can do." Hola smiled, put the glass to his mouth, and tipped his head back. "Pack it in, Hola." Waller's cheeks flushed as they watched Hola's Adam's apple rise and fall beneath the unshaven chin. "Happy?" Hola asked, putting the empty glass down in front of him. "Our job?" "I couldn't give a shit about your job." Hola buttoned up his reefer jacket. "If Mueller wants something, he can ring me or wait until I'm back at work in the morning. Now, I'm going home, and I hope I won't see your faces for the next 12 hours. Gentlemen?" Harry raised himself to his full 192 centimeters and lurched to the side. "You arrogant prick," Waller said, rocking back in his chair. "You bloody loser. If only the reporters who wrote about you after Australia had known you haven't got the balls. The balls to do what, Wallers? Horla was still smiling. Lock up drunken 16-year-olds because they've got Mohicans? The younger officer glanced at Waller. Rumors had been doing the rounds at police college last year that some young punks had been hauled in for drinking beer in public places and beaten in the cells with oranges packed in wet towels. You've never understood esprit de corps, Horla, Waller said. You just think about yourself. Everyone knows who was driving the car in Vinderen and why a good policeman smashed his skull against a fence post. Because you're a drunk, Horla, and you drove while under the influence. You should be bloody glad the force swept the facts under the carpet. Had they not been concerned about the family and the force's reputation, the younger officer accompanying Waller was learning something new every day. This afternoon, for example, he learned it was very stupid to rock on a chair while insulting someone, because you are totally defenseless if the insulted party steps over and lands a straight right between the eyes. As customers often fell over at Schroeder's, there was no more than a couple of seconds' silence before the buzz of conversation resumed. He helped Waller to his feet as he glimpsed the tails of Horla's jacket disappearing through the door. Wow, not bad after 8 beers, eh? He said, but shut up when he met Waller's gaze. Waller's not happy. Harry's legs strode out casually along the icy pavement of Dove Regatta. His knuckles didn't hurt. It would be early tomorrow morning before either pain or regret came knocking. He didn't drink during working hours, though he had done it before, and Dr. Aoun contended that every new relapse started when the old one finished. The white-haired, roly-poly Peter Ustinov clone had laughed so much his double chin shook as Harry explained to him that he was keeping away from his old foe, Jim Beam, and confining himself to beer, because he didn't like beer much. You've been in a mess, and the moment you open the bottle you're there again. There's no halfway house, Harry. Well, he was struggling home on 2 legs, generally managing to undress himself and getting himself to work the next day. It hadn't always been like that. Harry called it a halfway house. He just needed a few knockout drops to sleep. That was all. A woman said hello from under a black fur hat as she passed. Was it someone he knew? Last year, lots of people said hello, particularly after the interview on TV when Anne Grosvold had asked him how he felt to shoot a serial killer. Well, better than sitting here and answering questions like that one, he had said, with a crooked smile, and it had been the hit of the spring, the most repeated quote this side of one politician's defense of an agricultural policy. Sheep are nice animals. Harry inserted the key into the lock of his flat in Sophie's Gate. Why he had moved to Bislett escaped him. Perhaps it had been because his neighbors in Toyin had started looking at him strangely and keeping their distance, which at first he had construed as showing respect. Fine, the neighbors here left him in peace, though they would appear in the corridor to check everything was okay if, on rare occasions, he should slip on a step and roll back down to the nearest landing. The backward rolls hadn't started until October, after he had hit a brick wall over Sis's case. Then the air had been knocked out of him, and he had started dreaming again. And he knew only one way to keep the dreams at arm's length. He had tried to pull himself together, take Sis to the cabin in Rowland, but she had become very withdrawn since the assault, as she didn't laugh as easily as before. So he had rung his father a couple of times, although the conversations hadn't been very long, just long enough to indicate that his dad wanted to be left in peace. Harry closed the door to his flat, shouted that he was home, and nodded with satisfaction that there was no answer. Monsters came in all shapes and sizes, but so long as they weren't waiting for him in the kitchen when he came home, there was a chance he would have an undisturbed night's sleep. Chapter 4. Thursday, January 9th. The cold snap came so suddenly that when Harry stepped out of the door, he involuntarily gasped for breath. He looked up at the reddening sky between the houses and opened his mouth to release the taste of gall and Colgate. Yum. In Holberg's Pass, he caught the tram rattling down Wellhaven's gate. He found a seat and opened the Aftenposten. Another pedophilia case. There had been 3 of them over recent months, all Norwegians caught red-handed in Thailand. The leader reminded readers of the Prime Minister's promise during his election campaign that he would intensify investigation of sexual crimes, including those involving Norwegians abroad, and demanded to know when the public would see any results. Secretary of State Bjorn Skildsen from the Prime Minister's office commented that they were working with the Thai government to further investigative powers. "This is urgent," the Aftenposten editor wrote. "People expect to see some action. It's not right that a Christian minister can permit this outrage to continue." "Come in." Harry opened the door and looked straight into Barney Mueller's yawning mouth. He was leaning back in his chair with his long legs sticking out from under the desk. "There you are. I was expecting you yesterday, Harry." "So I was told." Harry sat down. "I don't work when I'm drunk, or vice versa. It's kind of a principle I have." This was intended to sound ironic. "A police officer is a police officer 24 hours a day, Harry, sober or not. I had to persuade Waller not to report you, you know." Harry shrugged, indicating that he'd said all he had to say on the subject. "Okay, Harry, we won't discuss that now. I've got a job for you. A job which, in my opinion, you don't deserve, but which I'm going to give you anyway. Would it make you happy if I didn't want it?" "Cut the Philip Marlowe stuff, Harry. It doesn't suit you," Mueller replied brusquely. Harry smirked. He knew the Paz liked him. I haven't even told you what it is." "I assume from the fact that you sent a car to get me in my free time, it's not to put me on traffic duty." "Exactly. So why don't you let me finish?" Harry gave a brief, dry chuckle and leaned forward in his chair. "Can we speak our minds, Pass?" "What mind?" Mueller almost asked, but limited himself to a nod. "I'm not the man for important assignments right now, boss. I suppose you've seen how things are going at the moment, or how things are not going, or barely going. I do my job, the routine stuff, try not to get in anyone's way, and clock in and out in a sober condition. I'd give the job to one of the other boys if I were you." Mueller sighed, laboriously drew up his legs, and got to his feet. "Can I speak my mind, Harry? Had it been up to me, someone else would have gotten the job. But they want you. So it would be a great favor to me, Harry." Harry looked up warily. Barney Mueller had helped him out of enough scrapes over the last year for him to know that it was just a question of time before he had to start repaying the debt. "Hang on. Who are they?" "People in high positions. People who can make my life hell if they don't get what they want." "And what will I get to take on the job?" "And what will I get to take on the job?" Mueller knitted his brows as fiercely as he could, but he had always found it difficult to muster a stern expression on his open, boyish face. "What do you get?" "You get your salary. For the duration." For Christ's sake, what do you get? I'm in the picture now, boss. Some of those high-up people reckon the officer who cleared up the case of Sydney last year must be one hell of a guy, and it's your job to make him toe the line. Am I wrong? Harry, please don't push this one too far. I'm not wrong. I wasn't wrong yesterday when I saw Waller's face either. That's why I've already slept on it, and this is my suggestion. I'm a good boy. I turn up for work, and when I've finished, you give me 2 detectives full-time for 2 months and complete access to all of our data. What are you talking about? You know what I'm talking about. If this is about your sister's rape case, I'm afraid I have to say no, Harry. The case was closed, once and for all, remember? I remember, boss. I remember the report in which it stated she had Down syndrome and that therefore it was not inconceivable that she'd made up the rape to hide the fact that she'd become pregnant by a casual acquaintance. Yes, indeed, I do remember. There was no concrete. She wasn't hiding anything. Jesus Christ, man, I went to her flat in Sogan, and in the bathroom I saw her bra in the laundry basket, drenched with blood. She had threatened to cut off her nipples. She was terrified. She thinks everyone is like she is. And when this guy dressed in a suit bought her a meal and asked if she was fancied seeing a film in this hotel room, she just thought he was being nice. And even if she had remembered the room number, it would have been hoovered, cleaned, and the bed changed more than 20 times since she was raped. There wouldn't be much concrete evidence. No one remembered any bloodstained sheets. I've worked the hotels, Mueller. You'd be surprised how many bloodstained sheets you change over a couple of weeks. People bleed all the bloody time. Mueller vigorously shook his head. Sorry, you had your chance to prove it, Harry. It wasn't enough, boss. It wasn't enough. It's never enough. But you have to draw a line somewhere. With our resources, well, give me a free hand for a month. Mueller suddenly raised his head, with one eye closed. Harry knew he'd been rumbled. You cunning bastard. You've wanted the job all the time, haven't you? You just had to do a bit of bartering first. Sorry. Harry stuck out his lower lip and waggled his head from side to side. Mueller looked out the window. Then he sighed. Okay, Harry. I'll see what I can do. But if you mess up, I'll have to make a couple of decisions I know some people on the force think I should have made a long time ago. And you know what that means, don't you? Boot up the arse, boss? Harry smiled. What's the job? I hope your summer suit is dry cleaned. And you can remember where you last put your passport. Your plane goes in 12 hours to a faraway destination. The further the better, pass. Harry was sitting on a chair by the door in the cramped flat in Sogan. His sister was sitting by the window, watching the snowflakes in the light from the street lamp below. She sniffled a couple times. Since she had her back to him, Harry couldn't see whether it was because of the cold or his imminent departure. She had lived in sheltered housing for 2 years now and was managing well under the circumstances. After the rape and the abortion, Harry had taken along some clothes and a toilet bag and moved in. But it wasn't long before she told him enough was enough. She was a big girl now. I'll be back soon, sis. When? She was sitting so close to the window that condensation formed into a rose whenever she spoke. Harry sat behind her and placed a hand on her back. He could feel from the gentle tremble she was about to cry. When I've caught the baddies, I'll be straight back home. Is it? No, it's not him. I'll catch him afterward. Have you talked to Dad today? She shook her head. He sighed. If he doesn't ring, I want you to ring him. Can you do that for me, sis? Papa never says anything, she whispered. Papa's sad because Mama died, sis. But it's so long ago. That's why it's time we got him talking again, sis. And you'll have to help me. Will you do that? Will you do that, sis? She turned without a word, put her arms around him, and buried her head into his neck. He stroked her hair and could feel his shirt getting wetter. The suitcase was packed. Harry had rung Ståle Aun and told him he was flying to Bangkok on business. He hadn't had a lot to say, and Harry didn't quite know why he had rung him. Perhaps because it was good to tell someone who might wonder where he was. Harry didn't think it was a great idea to ring the bar staff at Schroeder's. Take the vitamin B shots I gave you, Auna said. Why is that? Makes life easier if you want to be sober. New environment, Harry. It could be a good start, you know. I'll think about it. Thinking's not enough, Harry. I know. That's why I don't need to take the shots. One of the boys from the hostel further up the street was leaning against the wall and shivering in a tight denim jacket while puffing away at a fag as Harry eased his suitcase into the boot of the taxi. Going away? Yep. South? Bangkok. Alone? Yep. Say no more. He gave Harry a thumbs up and winked. Harry took the ticket from the woman behind the check-in desk and turned. Harry Hola? The man with the steel-rimmed glasses eyed him with a sad smile. And you are? Dagfinn Toros, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'd like to wish you luck and assure ourselves that you've understood the delicacy of the assignment. After all, everything has moved with such haste. Thank you for the thought. I've understood that it is my job to find a murderer without making too much of a splash. Mueller has given me instructions. Good. Discretion is vital. Don't trust anyone, not even officials who claim to be working for the ministry. They might turn out to be from, well, for example, Dagbladet. Torus opened his mouth as if to laugh, but Harry could see he was serious. Dagbladet journalists don't wear the ministry badge on their lapel, Herr Torus, or jacket in January. By the way, I've seen from the papers that you're my contact in the ministry. Torus nodded, mostly to himself. Then he jutted out his chin and lowered his voice by half a tone. Your plane goes soon, so I won't hold you up much longer. Just listen to what I have said. He removed his hands from his jacket pockets and folded them in front of him. How old are you, Holle? 33, 34? You still have a career in front of you? I've been doing a lot of digging, you see. You're talented, and it's obvious people high up like you and protect you. That can carry on for as long as things can go well. But it won't take much for you to land flat on your arse, and you could easily drag your pals down with you. Then you'll find that your so-called friends are suddenly over the hills and far away. So try to stay on your feet, Holle, for everyone's sake. This is well-meant advice from an old ice skater. He smiled with his mouth, but his eyes were studying Harry closely. You know what, Holle? I always have such a depressing sense of something finishing when I come to Fornebu Airport. Something finishing, something new starting. Really? Holle said, wondering if he had time for a beer at the bar before the gate closed. Well, now and then that can be good. A renewal, I mean. Let's hope so, Torus said. Let's hope so. Part 2. Chapter 5. Friday, January 10th. Harry Holle straightened his sunglasses and looked down the row of taxis outside Don Muang International Airport. He felt like he had entered a bathroom and someone had just turned on a scalding hot shower. He knew the secret to tackling high humidity was to ignore it. Let the sweat pour down you and think about something else. The light was worse. It pierced the cheap, dark plastic glasses through to the shiny alcoholic eyes and cranked up the headache that, until then, had only been rumbling in his temples. Meter taxi or 250 baht, sir? Harry tried to concentrate on what the taxi driver was saying. The trip had been hell. The bookshop at the airport in Zurich only sold German books, and they had shown Free Willy 2 on the plane. "Meter's fine," Harry said. A garrulous Dane next to him had chosen to turn a blind eye to the fact that he was plastered, and showered him with advice about how to avoid being cheated in Thailand. Clearly an inexhaustible subject of conversation. He must have been of the opinion that Norwegians were charmingly naive people whom it was every Dane's duty to save from con tricks. "You have to haggle over everything," he said. "That's the idea, you know." "What if I don't?" "You'll ruin it for us." "Pardon?" You'll be helping to raise prices to make Thailand more expensive for everyone else." Harry had studied the man, who was wearing a beige Marlboro shirt and new leather sandals, and decided to drink some more. "Surasak Road 111, Harry said, and the driver smiled, put the suitcase in the boot, and held the door open for Harry, who crawled in and noticed that the wheel was on the right-hand side. "In Norway, we complained about the English insisting on driving on the left," he said as they drove onto the motorway. "But recently I heard more people in the world drive on the left than on the right. Do you know why?" The driver glanced in the mirror with an even broader smile. "Sodersack Road, yes?" "Because they drive on the left in China," Harry mumbled. He was glad the motorway cut through the misty skyscraper landscape like a straight gray arrow. He could sense that a couple of sudden bends would be enough to release the Swiss air omelet into the rear seat. "Why isn't the meter running?" "Sodersack Road, 500 baht, yes?" Harry leaned back in the seat and looked up at the sky. Well, he looked up, for there was no sky to be seen, just a hazy vault lit by a sun he couldn't see either. Bangkok, the city of angels. The angels wore masks, cut the air with a knife, and tried to remember what color the sky had been in earlier times. He must have fallen asleep, because when he opened his eyes, the car wasn't moving. He hitched himself up on the seat and saw they were surrounded by vehicles. Small, open shops and workshops lay cheek by jowl along the pavements, milling with people who all seemed to know where they were going. And they were in a hurry to get there. The driver had opened a window, and a cacophony of urban sounds merged with the radio. There was a smell of exhaust and sweat in the boiling hot car. "Traffic jam?" The driver shook his head with a smile. Harry's teeth crunched. What was it he had read somewhere? That all the lead you inhale ends up in the brain sooner or later, and it makes you lose your memory, or did it make you psychotic? As if by a miracle, the traffic suddenly began to move again, and motorbikes and mopeds swarmed around them like angry insects and launched themselves at crossroads with utter contempt for life or limb. Harry counted 4 fully fledged near misses. "Incredible there are no accidents," Harry said to fill a silence. The driver looked in the mirror and smiled. "There are accidents. Many." By the time they finally arrived at the police station in Sursak Road, Harry had already made up his mind. He didn't like the city. He wanted to hold his breath, do the job, and get on the first and not necessarily best plane back to Oslo. At the police station, Harry was greeted by a young officer who introduced himself as No, N-H-O. He had a slim body, short hair, and an open, friendly face. Harry knew that in a few years the expression would change. The lift was full and stank. It was like being thrust into a bag of sweaty sports clothes. Harry towered 2 heads above the others. One person looked up at the tall Norwegian and laughed, impressed. Another asked Noah a question and then said to Harry, "Ah, Norway. That's... What's his name now? Please help me." Harry smiled and tried to display his hands apologetically, but there wasn't room. Yes, very famous. The man insisted. Ibsen? Harry essayed. Nansen? No, more famous. Hampson? Gregg? No. The man gave them a stern look as they got out on the fourth. Welcome to Bangkok, Harry. Chief of Police is small and swarthy. Ooh, I'm getting tired. All right, I'm going to stop right there. That's page 38, 38 pages. Until next time. Hello. I love you. Have a good day.